Okay, it's time now to create a basic assessment tool, and you'll do that within this task. So this task is asking you to map evidence for Susan's recognised prior learning. Remember, Susan Jones is a qualified school teacher and she's currently working. So you're going to learn about mapping, and you're going to start to design some questions which will function as our basic assessment tools. So first of all, we need to click on the icon, and then we'll work through how we tick the question column to map and learn about the performance criterion as one of the components within the unit, and have a look at some suggestions for a couple of questions that you can embed into this document yourself, and how you would create your assessor guidelines, which at Evoke we ask our assessors to highlight the text in red, which shows the assessor what the correct response would be. So let's work through all of that right now. Double click on the icon, and we've actually opened up one of the units from the 10 units for the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment. This is one of the elective units, and I'm just going to make that a little bit larger here for a minute. Please excuse me. Just so we can see what we're doing there. Okay, so the first component is the unit descriptor, and it says here, I've actually highlighted the phrase a presentation, so it's not asking for a nationally accredited training package presentation, it's just asking for any presentation. Okay, so moving down, there's no licensing requirements. The application, that's what I'm trying to get to. It's just bouncing past it. Alright, this unit applies to individuals who may be expected to make presentations for a range of purposes, such as. Now, such as means that it's not limited to these purposes suggested. So it can be just for a range of any purposes. It could be because it's for their occupation, or just a general interest presentation. This is an elective, so you know, it's a lovely broad one that most people could look at getting recognised prior learning for this particular unit. If you've made any forms of presentation, this is something to keep in mind for yourself. So, the elements and performance criterion, this is where the mapping is going to be taking place. So all I've done is taken an electronic version, please excuse me jumping around here, and I've added 4 extra columns in my electronic Word version, and I've just named them qualifications, teacher registration. This is specifically mapping for Susan's recognised prior learning, or for any currently registered teachers. Then we have any work product that we might gather as evidence, and of course we need for competency not just the skill that all of these things would demonstrate, but we need the knowledge component as well. So we have a column there for questions. Now I have pre-mapped the fact that Susan's Bachelor of Education would be her qualification, and her current teacher's registration. That's adequately going to provide the skill. This woman makes presentations every day as a teacher. So it can be the K-12 curriculum in her case, because we're not specifying above that it had to be a nationally accredited vet sector type presentation. It could be any presentation. So that's fine. We've got our skill base there, and we have very strong evidence because a lot goes into maintaining current teachers' registration. So there is another whole organisation there that's running checks on Susan every year to make sure that she maintains her registration, and she would have to be making very effective presentations in order to do that. So we're happy with that as assessors. And we just now need to make sure that we get the knowledge component there. So I'm going to whiz down to another component area. Please excuse this screen moving. We've got the required skills and knowledge. We're now at the evidence guide, and we're looking specifically at the critical aspects. So evidence of the following is essential: preparation, delivery and evaluation of the effectiveness of at least 2 presentations related to the candidate's occupation or area of interest. Well, we know Susan's making at least 2 presentations a day as a teacher. We've got that bit covered. Let's move down. Knowledge of the principles of effective communication. All right, now we're cooking. Now we've got an area that we can start designing our basic assessment tools for. We're going to be designing in our course here some simple questions. So we need to think of some questions that work with that performance criterion around effective communication. So let's bounce back up here. All right, we're back at our performance criterion. Some of the performance criterion around communication. Let's just work through them. Plan and document presentation approach. Yeah, no. Choose presentation strategies and delivery methods that match characteristics. Nah. Select presentation aids and materials. So that could be a question that you could look at about effective communication if you want to. But let's move down. Oh, sorry, too far. Brief others involved in presentation on their roles and responsibilities. Oh, it's still a bit dry. Select techniques to evaluate presentation and effectiveness. Well, you're going to need effective communication in this. So we could then tick the question column here for mapping. Remember, we've got the question column here. That way we've mapped it and said at a glance that we've created some evidence. You know, we've designed some evidence in when we're looking as assessors at recognising her prior learning. So let's make up a question. What we're suggesting you do here at Evoke, and your own registered training organisation will have their processes and methods for this, but we're going to document it this way. We're going to put a Q for question, and the suggested question would be, what techniques do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of your presentations? Now, the other thing we're suggesting, to keep it simple, to really guide your candidates to what style of information you're after, is to offer them some multiple choice. Okay, so the red text here is the assessor guidelines benchmark. This is the answer sheet. Okay, this is so any assessor can pick this up and know that the red text is the correct answer. So, what techniques do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of your presentations? Well, let's first make that into a question with a question mark. Check for understanding by asking, am I making myself clear? Would you like me to repeat that in a different way? Oh gosh, this is painful. There we are. So, check for understanding by asking, am I making myself clear? Would you like me to repeat that in a different way? Effective communication, especially when you're checking for understanding, is putting the onus on yourself as a trainer. You have to realise you're an expert in what you're training in and presenting in. These people are probably hearing this information for the very first time. They don't have experience. They don't have a context. So I guess a metaphor around that is you need to build them a web so all of these new concepts can start to stick to it. So that's going to take some time, a lot of repetition. So you wouldn't be expecting at an early stage for them to have complete understanding, and it can be a little bit confronting if you're going to be, you know, saying to them, well, who's not understanding me? Especially if you're putting a bit of tone or inflection into that. Who here still doesn't understand? You know, showing a bit of frustration in your voice. It's not effective at all. Who's really going to be volunteering in front of a crowd of their peers or colleagues to admit, yeah, I'm the slow one, I'm a bit stupid, I'm not understanding. So focus it on yourself. All right? So check for understanding. Am I making myself clear? Would you like me to repeat that in a different way? And people are more inclined to put their hand up, and that way you can just frame it slightly differently. So the B response might be, no need to evaluate the effectiveness. It's not a nationally registered course. Well, that's incorrect. That's a myth, because any presentation that you make, you want it to be effective. So in any presentation, it's not just because there's no laws or rules around it. You want to make sure you're checking for understanding. Therefore, the A one is correct. Now, you're welcome to pause this and type the question exactly how it is using the red text for the benchmark response. You're welcome to then tick in the questions column, which then maps that piece of evidence. And the way that we tick that is, you'll notice that the font is set to Wingdings 2. Now that allows your keyboard letters and numbers to become symbols. So when you hit caps lock P on your keyboard, caps lock P, it makes a tick. Okay, so caps lock P is what you would have to hit. Look, alternately, you could always highlight one, right click, copy, and paste if you'd like to do it that way. Either way. So there's one. We found a basic assessment tool, a basic question we can ask that fits. I'm just repeating here, there's nothing new. Building your own context, your own spider's web here as we give you repeated ways so you can understand. We're going back down here to the evidence guide, and we've said we needed to build some knowledge of the principles of effective communication. So we're asking questions that we've found in the performance criterion around effective communication. Going to bounce back up, please excuse the ride here. So that was in 1.5 we found. We only need 2 or 3 questions. Susan's a teacher. We're just checking her knowledge here. So let's have a look as well. Here's a performance criterion. Explain and discuss desired outcomes of the presentation with the target audience. Well, I mean, yeah, that would be effective to communicate. But let's move on. Let's try something a little bit more explicit. Use presentation aids and materials to support target audience's understanding of key concepts and central ideas. Yeah, well, look, you could definitely use your presentation aids as effective communication and have some questions about that if you like. I personally think that'd be a good one suited to your product. Okay, if you needed to negotiate with your client, if you had a client that wasn't a registered teacher and you didn't have all of this lovely strong evidence, you would definitely be asking for some product there. But I don't think so much about a question. So let's move down. And look, it's a matter of choice. It's a matter of interpretation. Here's one. Monitor non-verbal and verbal communication. So here's that word communication. Monitor non-verbal and verbal communication of participants to promote attainment of presentation outcomes. Well, that one nails it. That's exactly one we'd want to have a question around. So here's a proposed question. You'd put your cue again. What phrases do you tend to say when providing positive feedback? And then our red benchmark response would be, and you would give them a range, words to the effect of. You've got it. Okay. Now, can you see here, the type of question we're asking is a short answer question here. We're leaving it a very open question. So it's a lot more difficult when you're designing your assessor guidelines, and it's a lot more difficult for the candidate to have a sense of what sort of information it is that you're after. Okay, so that's how you would have to manage an open question or a short answer question with something like, look, words to the effect of whatever. That would be for your assessor for their guidelines, and you would hope that with a little bit of prompting You know, you could say that, look, for example, you know, for positive feedback, what I mean by positive feedback is when I'm trying to explain to the learner that they're on the right track. So I might say, yeah, look, you're on the right track. That's great. What types of things do you say? And then you're enabling them to answer that question. Little bit of a difficult one. They tend to get a little bit defensive, a little bit nervous, and perhaps a more effective way would be to offer them some multiple choice. So here's an example of a multiple choice. Sometimes you want to signal that your learner is doing a great job, but you don't want to break the momentum of a conversation. So what body language, what gestures could you make so they're getting that sense of positive feedback? And you could say, look, here's some examples and you tell me which ones you think would work. You know, perhaps you could nod and smile. Do you think that's a form of non-verbal positive feedback? They'd say yes. You know, maybe you could give them a thumbs up. Is that something that you might feel comfortable using? Yes. You know, perhaps you could high five. You know, give them a high five in the air. No, I'm not really comfortable doing that. Not a problem, not a problem. And you can see here within our benchmarks any of the above. So they might offer it to you first. You might see if it's something that fits. An assessor is going to be an expert in the unit that they're delivering. So, you know, you could use your discretion then as an assessor to see whether it's a non-verbal technique that's not covered here. What we're just saying is by containing it within a multiple choice, your candidate has got a real solid sense of the style of information you're after, and you're just controlling the information a little bit more easily there for both parties. So there's some options for you. Don't forget though, if you're going to use these, you've got to also caps lock P. Already had it in caps lock. Place your tick. That's the mapping portion. Have a look quickly at some others. Use persuasive communication techniques to secure audience interest. Yeah, that's about effective communication. So describe the body language of an interested learner. There's a good idea for a question. And here is some multiple choice responses. Leaning forward would be a correct response. If a candidate or a learner is leaning forward, that is really good body language that shows that they're engaged and interested. You know, perhaps you could put some others. So maybe we could put some wrong ones there, some ones that show that they're not engaged. Oh. Make that black. Now there's one that definitely shows that they're not really following along very effectively. Yawning. Okay, not always a sign that they've had a big night the night before. It could very well be that, you know, you need to start switching it up and engaging them more, checking for understanding, offering them some positive feedback, getting them involved, getting them actively participating instead of just a chalk and talk passive lecture from yourself. All right, so leaning forward would be effective body language for them. So once again, you would be ticking caps lock P. You would be ticking to map the question for that one as well. You'll see in yours all of these are blank. So at any time, just keep pausing this YouTube so you can copy these if you would like to, or start creating some of your own. Oh, there we go. There's some others there. Alright, so that is how we would map. That is how we've documented our basic assessment tools. Don't forget you would always save that before you exit. And then we've got some questions. Susan is e-learning from home. So what type of questioning would be best for her? Would it be written questionnaires on a computer, or face-to-face direct questions? All right, so look, she might be learning in a different state from where you are, and yet you want to have a competency conversation for her recognised prior learning, well, what, has she got to spend $700 to fly out so you can ask her some face-to-face questions? Not really very practicable, is it? So written questionnaires on a computer would be fine. Another idea might be to have a web conference or a telephone call, and you could do some direct questioning that way for her. So I would say B would be the best selection there given the circumstances. 16B. When trialling your basic assessment tool questions, which questioning method was easier to provide clear instruction and effective assessor guidelines? The short answer ones, where your candidate might get a little bit nervous and unsure of the range or where you're headed, and you then find you've got to up your skill with asking enabling questions, and then you've got all of the issues with the assessor guidelines and making sure you've got a broad enough range there. Or multiple choice. So instantly the candidate has the full range, they have the full scope, and they can start to break down and analyse what would be the most correct selections. And it's very easy for your assessor to apply your guidelines, because look, it's either A or B or C, and the correct answer's in red. Very, very simple. So my suggestion would be that when you're trialling it, because it's a basic assessment tool, go with the multiple choice.